for cueing what I'm choosing as sort of a theme music for Ansible here. Key opening lines in your mind. You have capacities, to telepath messages through the vast unknown. That's from Calling Occupants of Interplanetary Craft, Klaatu. So I think that's a bit of a theme song because it sort of gets to more the science fiction angle of what is the word Ansible like. It comes from science fiction, and there it's supposed to be not your mind telepathically getting through the universe, but technology that lets you communicate with a bunch of stuff through the cosmos. Though maybe we'll be merging technology and minds in time, right? But okay, we're here to talk today about the Ansible trademark, actual realizable technology. It's just for managing, doing server automation or configuration management or whatever kind of way you want to view these things with real world stuff. And so the central aspect of Ansible is a part that you would call the controller. And the idea is with a controller, you might actually set it up to control all the things. And there's a lot of things you could hook into Ansible, and that's kind of where my concern starts to kick in. Like, if you go so far as to put Ansible on a server, which isn't the only place you could put it as a controller, by the way, and we're going to get to that. But and you have it controlling all the things. Well, then that's kind of a central point of failure, right? And so that's a little scary. So just a little bit more about Ansible. It works on a push model. So it connects out to all your things, and it tells them what to do. And the other bit of its philosophy is that it's agentless. So the idea is that you don't need to install anything on your systems that Ansible is reaching out to. Though I don't know, is it really agentless? Because commonly the assumption is that you're going to be maybe connecting to something that has OpenSSH. Well, that in a sense kind of is an agent. It's just a stock agent you already have, right? And the other assumption usually is that Python is present. Though there's exceptions to both these things. There's a wide variety of things you can control with Ansible. This is kind of the core of it, is to do, and the idea of having Python already on a system is that then Ansible can just push a bunch of Python code and say, here's what you're running. So, pushing all this Python code out to things, there's some implications that come to my mind when I think about, if you make your Ansible controller like the centralized server, and you're doing all these things, maybe in your bad scenario of what happens to your controller, maybe your attacker doesn't actually get so far as getting the credentials that you might have where you're, because that's the first scary thing. You're going to put all these credentials on something. But let's say you manage to protect the credentials. But as long as the actual code you're pushing out to all these things you're controlling, if that can be altered, then bad things can happen, and it can happen to all the things. So how might you get your Ansible controller compromised, especially if you put it on a server? First of all, if you put a web interface on top of it, and they actually have a specific one in the Ansible world, this sort of floss version of it's called AWX, and we know what web apps have all kinds of flaws. Second thing I'd like to bring up as a concern is, the supply chain. And so I'm going to go into a little sideline here. What is the Ansible supply chain? Because there's actually kind of several layers to it. There's the Ansible core, and this is anything that would be in what's called the Ansible.built-in namespace. And then there's all these other Ansible collections you get if you do the pip install Ansible. They call that the batteries included. And then even within the batteries included, there's a collection called community.general, and that's even easier to get a contribution into versus getting an entire collection added to the batteries included, as it were. And then there's this whole thing called the Ansible Galaxy, where it's this whole thing where anybody can kind of publish their, hey, look what I did with Ansible stuff. And there's a lot in there. But there's also then, a lot of danger if you're just sort of relying on whoever to supply you with stuff. And then the last thing in your supply chain is you and your people. And if your people are writing Ansible configurations or Ansible code, and then you're later running it on your controller, well, then that exposes you to an insider attack. And anytime you think about insider attacks, you should actually just also think about what if your insiders, even if they're good people, if they are compromised in some way. And so that's why I have this screen grab here from 1994's Hackers. We've got the guy who's socially engineered that he's a telecom repair person, and he got under the desk, and then a keylogger got in there. Now, how do you distinguish the two of them? There's actually a good answer to that coming up, because an actual insider should actually be. It should be harder for them to cause damage, but that's harder for you to prevent, right? You have to give people a certain amount of access to get their jobs done. But this guy you should be able to keep out. Now, and then this is more of a kind of a fringe theory, because it's a push model. Most of the communication comes from the controller to the host being controlled. There is then, of course, the host talks back a little bit, and so there's some surface area there for it to talk back to the controller and maybe damage the controller, and then then get control of all the things, right? So there's a little bit of a surface area there. I think they've kind of covered that pretty good, and there's been some research on it, but it's sort of like you want to look at these low probability but high cost events, right? And then going even further down the spectrum of black swan level low probability things, like what if there's a flaw in SSH or even a kernel, and you've got your Ansible controller running on a server and it gets owned that way, right? And then you might say, well, if it's that bad, why at that point isn't all your things going to get owned anyways? And maybe not necessarily, because things are heterogeneous, right? And so there might be one setup part of your setup that gets hit by something that's really black swan, like including your controller, but maybe not all your things. So you don't want the loss of your controller to necessarily mean the loss of all your things. So it's, again, low probability, high impact kind of thing to think about. So now we're on the risk. We've talked about some of the risk, and now we'll talk about the risk mitigation. And number one thing I think in our field we should always talk about for risk mitigation is the principle of least privilege. And specifically, in the case of Ansible, I want to talk about hey, and this is right there in the manual. They say a controller can be on many different things. It could be on a server. It could be on a workstation. And what I want to sort of put out there as an idea is that if you are going to put some stuff on a server, that should be lesser privileges. And the things you do less frequently that require more privileges, put that on a provisioning workstation. And because provisioning shouldn't be, bringing things up doesn't have to necessarily be as common if you have things set up to kind of run most of the time. So that's where I get to demo number one. Now let's see if I can stay on mic while I get into demo mode here. All right. So I've got a PuTTY session here, but I am not logged into some server acting as my Ansible controller somewhere else. This is actually a GNU/Linux environment that's running within my Windows environment here, because an Ansible controller actually has to be run on GNU/Linux. So in this case, it's a Windows subsystem for Linux instance, or for you, it might be a virtual machine. So I logged into this with SSH. So just a local connection. So it's really just still part of my workstation setup here, and this is actually my work laptop. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the SSH credentials that allowed me to do this sort of login here within my system, and I'm going to run an Ansible playbook against two other hosts that are also for testing purposes. They're also here, but they could be actual things that were out there. So just a quick look at here is my list of Ansible hosts, and I've got a group of them called all the things. So I've got two hosts in there, and then this is my Ansible playbook. So we're going to do stuff to all the things. We're going to do tasks. First task is called do things, and I'm just using the Ansible print debug, and I'm saying calling occupants of interplanetary craft. And that failing, I guess, was inevitable, right? Here, I know how to do this again. Okay, so you guys will actually see me set up this PuTTY session. I have it as very limited steps here. Okay. And so that was passwordless there because it was SSH public key auth based. And let's try this again. Okay, well, the thing you practice for hours before and then doesn't work in the end, right? But the point I was going to get to was that this all the SSH magic I was actually doing here, I was actually doing what's called agent forwarding, where like I'm running SSH inside this session here, but I was SSHing to it, so I was kind of forwarding my credentials. And all of my SSH public key auth was actually done with this YubiKey acting as an open PGP smart card. And so the idea was, like, even on a provisioning workstation, you shouldn't necessarily even have credentials on that. If you can get it on a hardware security module, that's the way to do it. So it's a shame that I failed to demo it. But let's move on. So mitigation number 2. Of course, if you are going to put a web interface on top of Ansible, and even I'm thinking of doing that with some like limited privileges eventually in some of my workplace setup, you know, the manual security guides from Ansible folks, they say, you know, don't put it on the public internet. And for most people in the room, that's like, duh, you don't put this kind of thing on the public internet. But for me, I say, well, that's just a starting point. Even if you've got it isolated to a work network, you still have to keep in mind the M&M model of security. Are you just going to be hard on the outside and soft on the inside? And my answer to you guys is no, don't be soft on the inside. And so, you know, you don't always get to you don't want to rely on like LAN segmentation to be like the be-all and end-all of like who gets to access something internal within a company. So that's why we're going to have demo number 2, which will hopefully go better. This is me using an HTTP client certificate to further limit access to a web application beyond the other layers, of course, that your web app would itself have, like logging in and stuff. So let's see how this one goes. Got a bookmark. And this is intentional. This is the fail I was expecting because I've configured this web server to expect HTTPS client certificate. So now I'm going to add the client certificate. And I'm going to decrypt it with this really strong passphrase. And at least that demo worked. Okay, mitigation number 3, if you're bringing in other people's code or even really wanting to watch your own developers, auditing is a key thing. At least my first experience in Ansible auditing, in terms of something that I brought in from Ansible Galaxy, it wasn't too much to read, and that's because, you know, Ansible has really got like layers of abstraction built on layers of abstraction. So if you can rely on certain parts of the supply chain, like the stuff that's written by the core developers, and you find the thing that you're getting from Galaxy like mostly relies on that, then often things are actually a pretty, you know, they're not too long to audit. So auditing is worth it. And Glitchwitch brought this up first today, and so I'm glad to like bookend it at the end of the talk here, the end of the day here. I think I haven't gone so far as to play with this yet, so I have no demo. But I think code signing and verifying like what code you're actually running could play a role in making these setups a lot more robust. Especially that gets back to my supply chain last supply chain slide about the insider attack. If it's going to be, you want an insider attack to be an actual insider attack, like your actual insider signed the code that is the problem and not somebody else took over their system. And again, that's where, again, hardware security modules, I think, really come in as a way to like make PGP for signing more accessible, because it's really hard to get people to memorize a long passphrase, but you know, people are used to, like with their credit cards, memorizing a short PIN that locks out a device after 3 tries. So you can do the same thing with a PGP smart card and do your Git signing that way. And then I think Ansible does have a way you can get around its push model. You can use, there is something called Ansible pull. And I think that's worth like looking into more. And then I think that could pair really well with signature verification again, as like put more smarts on the actual end device. And so, by the time you've added all that, you've added your hosts are actually checking the code that they're running and are deciding when they pull it in. You've really taken the agent list out even further because you're really making it a bit of an agent. And I think maybe sometimes that's actually worthwhile. So in conclusion, getting back to our theme song, with your mind, you have the ability to form and transmit thought energy far beyond the norm. You close your eyes, you concentrate. Together, that's the way to send the message. We declare World Contact Day. Happy hacking. We're getting an encore. Thank you. Okay, well, I'm informed I have time for questions. As much as I prefer the hallway track, I'll see what I can take on here. I'm in the early stages. I haven't put it on a central server with a web interface in front of it. I'm doing some deployments, just like you saw without the fail at work, where I have a deployment workstation where the controller runs, and it's a specific, hey, the operator, I'm deciding now is time to exercise some control through Ansible, not it being an all the time thing. Well, I don't think as a technology it has a scaling limit. It has even all kinds of ways to put things in parallel and stuff. One scaling limit that kind of came to mind, this is me getting a little quirky again. With these kind of things, you can have it so that your authentication, I was trying to demo it actually with just, I had unlocked this with a PIN before I came on screen. And then after that, and that unlocking with a PIN makes it both something I have and something I know. But after that, it could do as much authentication as allowed because I turned off the, usually I use a mode where every single decryption and every single authentication and every single signature requires me to touch this touch sensor, and there's a light on there to tell me when it's time to do that. So that really makes sure it's like, yes, I ordered this operation, not somebody else on my system ordered it. So that creates a scaling issue. And I discovered that, not this one that I have, this YubiKey 4, but some of these PGP smart cards let you have 15 seconds after you touch it. It'll then sign off on anything else that comes to it in that 15 seconds. So that might be a little more practical, but not as wide open as, hey, after I unlock it, do all the signatures you want. So, maybe the scaling then is how many systems can you reach out to and authenticate to in 15 seconds? But yeah, broadly speaking, I don't think Ansible has much in the way of scaling limits. Where are we for time? Okay, well, that looks like the only question. So, congrats to the long con on his comeback.